All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Because look, we really need to acknowledge something that so many parents and educators deal with every single day. That deep, bone-weary exhaustion you feel when standard, everyday discipline tools just completely fail with kids who have ADHD. Seriously, if you've ever felt like you're just banging your head against a brick wall trying to manage behavior, I promise you, you are absolutely not alone in this.
And that really begs the big question, right? Do those traditional rewards and punishments actually work for an ADHD brain? I mean, so many of us rely on the usual carrots and sticks simply because, well, it's what we were taught. It's all we know. But frankly, they just don't seem to stick. And that struggle is totally understandable. But as we're going to see today, it's actually rooted entirely in science.
Just listen to this insight from Dr. Gail Tripp. She says, altered sensitivity to rewards and punishments may be a core characteristic of ADHD. Now think about that for a second. That is a massive aha moment. It literally changes the whole game. It completely shifts the narrative away from a child just being, stubborn or difficult and points us straight toward a profound neurological difference in how their brain actually processes motivation.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at why standard discipline fails. Then we'll dive into dopamine in the ADHD brain, explore the immediate reward preference, tackle the problem with punishment, and finally, better strategies for ADHD. Stick with me through the brain chemistry stuff, and I promise you'll walk away with a super practical playbook at the end.
All right, Section 1, Why Standard Discipline Fails. Let's look at the breakdown of promises and consequences and figure out why long-term promises just fall flat for the ADHD brain. Moving to Section 2, Dopamine in the ADHD brain. It's time to actually look under the hood at those chemical differences. So, right here is the invisible gap we're dealing with. A neurotypical brain, it experiences this amazing anticipatory dopamine surge. Basically, it gets a cellular high five just by predicting a reward, and that keeps it focused and moving forward. But the ADHD brain, it gets a delayed dopamine signal. When a reward is slowed down or pushed to the future, that chemical boost, well, it basically just gets lost in the mail. Let's put this into perspective. Imagine a typical 10-minute chore. At minute 1, the task begins, and boom, the neurotypical brain gets that dopamine boost. By minute 5, right in the middle of the chore, that brain is still happily coasting on continuous cellular reinforcement. But the ADHD brain, it is in a total chemical drought. It isn't until minute 10, when the task is totally over and the reward is finally handed over, that the ADHD brain gets any reinforcement at all. So they're essentially starved of motivation while doing the actual work. No wonder it's such a struggle. And that brings us to Section 3, the immediate reward preference, and this intense, driving hunger for right now.
Now, researchers actually tested this. They asked kids to choose between a smaller, immediate reward and a much larger, delayed one. And wow, the results were striking. Kids with ADHD overwhelmingly chose the immediate reward. And here's the kicker. Even when they actively tried to wait for the bigger prize, the feelings of frustration and distraction just took over, causing them to impulsively grab whatever was right in front of them. Their brains are literally wired to seek out any available dopamine the absolute second the work gets tough.
So this introduces a concept called partial reinforcement. That just means providing a reward only some of the time a desired behavior happens rather than every single time. And the science shows us that without constant, steady, positive reinforcement, a child with ADHD might just stop engaging altogether. To the outside world, this looks exactly like defiance or laziness, right? But we now know it's actually a direct neurological response to a severe lack of chemical reinforcement in their brain.
All right, on to Section 4, the problem with punishment. We've talked about the short-term gains, so now let's talk about the very real long-term risks. Look, relying on punishment is a really dangerous game here. Children with ADHD are remarkably sensitive to punishment, way more sensitive than their peers. Now, add in the fact that they often have pretty weak emotion regulation skills, you've got a recipe for disaster. Honestly, even just the perception of punishment can cause a total emotional fallout. The overwhelming scientific consensus on this is crystal clear. Positive reinforcement isn't just a nicer way to do things, it is significantly, scientifically more effective.
Which leads us perfectly to Section 5, Better Strategies for ADHD. Let's explore some brain-aligned interventions you can literally start using today. Okay, here are 3 scientifically backed steps to basically build yourself a brand new playbook. Step 1 is building waiting capacity, Step 2 is bolstering transitions, and Step 3 is matching homework demands. Let's break these down one by one.
Strategy 1. Building a child's stamina for waiting. You've got to start really small here and just gradually increase those wait times. But here is the absolutely crucial part. You need to loudly, and I mean loudly, and frequently praise their efforts to wait. Think of waiting as a literal muscle for the ADHD brain. It requires targeted, nonstop praise to grow. You can even teach them self-praise techniques, so they can basically generate their own dopamine hits when things get tough.
Strategy 2. Support executive functions during transitions. Transitions are prime time for behavioral struggles, mostly because the environment is suddenly shifting. To counter this, you want to make the rules incredibly obvious, give them plenty of extra time to adapt to changes, and just offer calm, steady reminders. Remember, it is almost impossible to over-communicate your expectations during these shifts. Over-communicate like crazy.
And finally, strategy 3, matching homework demands. Look, when homework is just way too difficult, reduce the duration. Keep your levels of praise incredibly high and focus on rewarding the sheer effort they're putting in, rather than just waiting for the final outcome or grade. By adjusting the scale of the work, you prevent the child from feeling chemically starved and totally overwhelmed. It keeps them engaged, and more importantly, it keeps them feeling successful.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground here, but if there is one single overarching theme to all of these strategies, it's this. Positive reinforcement fuels learning so much more effectively than punishment ever could. By matching our discipline style to their brain's actual dopamine needs, we are setting them up to genuinely thrive.
So, I want to conclude this explainer with a pretty provocative question for you to chew on. If behavior is fundamentally driven by brain chemistry, are we punishing the child or are we just punishing their neurology? It's a huge paradigm shift, right? When we finally stop fighting their brain chemistry and start actually working with it, we apply this incredible brain-aligned empathy that truly supports these brilliant, highly capable minds. Thank you so much for exploring this with me.